the day humanity declared, "No more king's part de l'homme conro." The chains of Halora. There are places in the galaxy where silence does not mean peace. It means fear. It means the breath of the oppressed is too shallow, too fragile, too uncertain to fill the void with sound. Such was the silence of Halora, a distant human colony that had once been alive with laughter, markets, and music drifting across its ocean winds. Now the air was heavy with the weight of an alien crown. The Halorans still remembered the day the sky cracked open. Their suns were blotted out by the black wings of ships that moved like shadows, vast and slow, carved from obsidian and light. They called themselves the Aurelian Dynasty, a monarchy so ancient it claimed to predate stars. To them, humans were not citizens, not equals, not even adversaries worth respecting. They were subjects. The first decree came before the fires had even stopped burning. Kneel, and you will be spared. And so the people of Halora knelt. The king who ruled the Aurelians was not seen by mortal eyes, only heard in decrees spoken by his gilded heralds. But his will was everywhere, in the mines where children were sent to scrape minerals for alien palaces they would never see, in the chains around the wrists of farmers forced to tithe their harvest, in the cold shimmer of collars that tracked their every movement. The Halorans lived, but they no longer belonged to themselves. The monarchy was not content with obedience. It demanded reverence. Statues of the Aurelian king rose where once stood fountains, his crown glimmering like a black sun. The people were told to whisper his name before sleep, to carve his emblem into their doors, to live as subjects not just in body but in soul. But even in silence, there is resistance. In the hidden corners of the colony, behind sealed cellar doors, inside abandoned factories, in the dark tunnels of old transport systems, a whisper grew. Earth will not allow this. Earth will come, for Earth was not Halora. Earth had fought its own wars of tyranny and crown, and when the last empire had fallen, humanity had spoken one truth that echoed through generations: no more kings. The Halorans clung to that truth like fire in the night. Still, no help came. Not at first. For 2 long years Halora endured. The Aurelians grew confident, their arrogance swelling like the tide. They saw humans as malleable clay, ready to be reshaped into a servile race. And then, on a day like any other, with laborers bent under alien whips and children trudging to mines, a signal came. It was not a fleet. It was not a weapon. It was a broadcast, across every channel, overriding every system in every tongue known to human ears. One voice declared, "To the Aurelians and to every throne among the stars, humanity does not serve kings. We will never serve kings. You may chain our bodies, but our spirit will not kneel. This is not surrender. This is war." The words were not shouted. They were spoken with a calm so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. They were a reminder, not only to the oppressors but to the oppressed, that humanity's memory was long, and its fire unquenchable. On Halora, the people wept, not with despair, but with the first trembling spark of hope. Mothers held their children tighter. Miners stood a little straighter, and farmers looked at the alien banners with a new kind of hatred. The silence was breaking. The Aurelians, in their arrogance, laughed. A broadcast, a handful of words across the void. Against their fleets, their centuries of dominion. What could such defiance matter? But they had miscalculated, for those words did not merely reach Halora. They did not merely echo on one world. They spilled like fire into the veins of every colony, where humans toiled under foreign crowns. In mines and markets, in barracks and slave camps, people lifted their heads. The phrase became a chant, a shield, a weapon. No more kings. No more kings. No more kings. The revolution had not yet begun, but the universe had heard humanity's heart. On Halora, the whispers turned to plans, and plans soon would turn to fire. The day humanity declared, "No more kings Part 2. The broadcast that shook empires. When the broadcast reached the throne world of the Aurelians, it arrived not as a voice, but as a wound. The great halls of their monarchy were carved from mountains of living crystal, veined with rivers of molten gold. The air shimmered with the pulse of starlight drawn from enslaved suns. Here the Aurelian king presided, a being veiled in shadow, his crown a lattice of black fire. The Aurelians were a people who measured time not in years, but in dynasties. They had seen empires rise and crumble like dust. They had broken the wills of 100 species. reshaping each into docile subjects who bent knee at the first sound of their heralds. Never, not once, had they been openly defied. And now, across the throne hall, the human broadcast played again and again. Its words were strange to Aurelian ears. They did not understand the weight of human history, the deep scars left by kings long overthrown. They did not understand revolutions written in blood, or the fire of peoples who had torn their crowns apart. To the Aurelians, monarchy was eternal, a law of the cosmos as immutable as gravity. So they laughed. Not the laughter of amusement, but of contempt, the rasping laughter of predators who mistake the flicker of fire for the flutter of a moth's wings. No more kings, the message had said. A defiance so absurd, so alien, they saw it as comedy. Yet for all their laughter, something unsettled them. It was not the words themselves, but the way they spread. The Aurelians ruled through fear, but fear is brittle. When cracked, it shatters fast. And as the human message burned its way across the subspace networks, silence no longer filled the mines, nor the camps, nor the cities draped in banners of the crown. On Halora, the whisper had become a murmur. In the dead of night, families gathered in secret to play the broadcast again. A single line carried like a hymn across cramped bunkers and rusting streets. Humanity does not serve kings. Men and women who had once walked with heads bowed now began to meet each other's eyes. Laborers who once endured their chains in silence began to hold their tools with new intent. The Aurelian overseers sensed the change but could not name it. To them, it was inconceivable that words alone could weaken shackles of iron. They did not know what it meant to be human, for Earth remembered. The people of Earth had buried kings in revolutions, torn empires apart with bare hands and written their freedom in the ashes of palaces. Their scars were lessons carried forward in story and song, carried forward across light years to every colony. Humanity had declared once that no man would wear a crown over them again, and now, across the stars, they declared it once more. The Aurelians thought themselves eternal. But eternity is fragile when belief falters, and belief was faltering. Among the Aurelians' other subjects, lesser races scattered across their dominion, the message spread like fire across dry grass. In the slave markets of the Karu, whispers rose. If humans can defy, why not us? On the prison worlds of Yexar, shackled soldiers lifted their heads. If they will not kneel, why should we? The Aurelians tried to smother it. They jammed frequencies, silenced transmissions, burned human texts, erased recordings. They executed those caught repeating the words. But repression only deepened the hunger. Every punishment made the words more sacred. On Halora, the first act of rebellion was small. So small the Aurelians did not notice. In the mining camps, a single wall bore graffiti scratched in broken English letters. No more kings. It was enough. The overseers tore down the words, whipped those suspected of writing them. But the next day the words reappeared. And the next, until the Aurelians painted the walls with blood and still the words came back, written in ash, in stone, in whispers. The message had become more than defiance. It had become a seed, and Earth, watching from afar, knew seeds when planted grow. On Earth, the broadcast had not been a casual statement. It had been a declaration, a line drawn in the cosmos. But humanity understood something the Aurelians did not. Wars are not won by ships alone. They are won by hearts. Earth's fleets were vast but scattered, its armies brave but stretched thin across the colonies. Against the Aurelians, humanity had no illusions of an easy war. But Earth also knew its history, how revolutions had always begun not with armies but with words. Not with weapons but with fire inside the soul. And now that fire burned brightest on Halora, here in the deepest tunnels of the mines, a man named Kalen Vey rose. He was not a soldier. He was not a leader. He was a miner, his body bent from years of labor, his hands scarred and burned. But he had seen the broadcast. He had felt the words like iron in his blood. And when he whispered no more kings to the men and women beside him, something shifted. They listened. Soon, his whispers became gatherings. Gatherings became oaths. And oaths, when spoken by the desperate, are stronger than steel. The Aurelians thought rebellion was unthinkable. They thought their subjects too broken to rise. But they had not lived through humanity's past. They had not seen how quickly the oppressed can become the unbreakable. What began as whispers in the dark would soon become fire in the streets. And as Halora stirred, the galaxy trembled, for humanity had spoken, and the stars were listening. The day humanity declared, "No more kings Part 3, sparks in the minds of Halora had no day and no night. Only darkness, only the eternal scrape of tools against rock, the metallic groan of carts pushed through narrow tunnels, the dim glow of alien lanterns dripping sickly green light onto walls streaked with ore. Here humanity labored like insects, digging minerals for palaces they would never see, their sweat feeding the wealth of an unseen king. But something had changed. The broadcast still echoed in their minds. No more kings. At first it had been a whisper. A fragile secret passed between workers too exhausted to dream. Yet in darkness, whispers spread easily. They carried down the tunnels, breathed from mouth to mouth like sparks drifting through air thick with coal dust. Kalen Vey, the miner with scarred hands, had never asked to lead anyone. But his voice carried with a weight that others could not ignore. When he spoke, it was not with eloquence or fine words. It was with the raw gravity of a man who had spent his life in chains and had finally found something worth dying for. "Every stone we dig," he murmured one night, crouched in a shadowed alcove with a dozen others, "is a stone we can use, not just for them, for us." The miners glanced at one another, their eyes glinting in the green light. Until that moment, tools had been symbols of servitude. But now they could be weapons. It began quietly. A cart accidentally overturned, spilling ore into tunnels and halting work for hours. A lantern shattered in the dark, leaving overseers blind while whispers slipped through shadows. Collars that once seemed unbreakable were cracked open with makeshift picks, freeing a handful of prisoners who had been condemned to lifelong service. Each act was small. Each act was insignificant in the eyes of the Aurelians. But together they were sparks, and sparks, when fed, can ignite. The Aurelians noticed, of course. Their overseers stalked the mines, their forms tall and angular, their armor carved with black sigils of the crown. Their voices were not spoken but hissed into the minds of men, cold and sharp, leaving trails of pain. They punished quickly, brutally, but something had shifted in the Halorans. Punishment no longer bred silence. It bred defiance. One overseer caught Kalen and his group lingering in a tunnel where they did not belong. The alien's talons reached for its whip, its crown sigil burning against the stone. The workers froze. To disobey was death. And yet, Kalen stepped forward. He did not kneel. He did not lower his eyes. He stared directly at the overseer, chest heaving, his body trembling, not with fear but with something new. Something stronger. The overseer hissed, pressing pain into Kalen's mind like a knife. But before the alien could strike, Kalen whispered one phrase, "No more kings." The words cut through the overseer's power. Not physically, not in any way that the alien could measure, but in that moment the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, a human on Halora had refused to bow, and the others, watching in silence, began to rise behind him. One by one, miners stood. Chains rattled. Collars gleamed. But their backs straightened, their gazes lifted. The overseer's whip cracked, but no one bent. No one kneeled. In that moment, rebellion was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Above the mines, the cities of Halora still wore the banners of the crown. The great statues of the Aurelian king loomed over markets stripped bare of joy. Families lived in crumbling homes, every doorway marked by the sigil of subjugation. Yet even here, sparks began to glow. Children drew crude symbols on the walls, broken crowns scratched into stone with sticks of coal. Farmers left parts of their harvest hidden from the overseers, feeding secret gatherings in the night. And in taverns where whispers traveled faster than drink, the chant began to grow. No more kings. No more kings. No more kings, the Aurelians scoffed. They had crushed rebellions before on 100 worlds, but they did not understand what they were facing. They had never known humanity's history. The revolutions written in fire, the monarchs dragged from thrones, the centuries-long memory of chains broken and crowns shattered. To them, rebellion was madness. To humanity, it was destiny. Deep in the mines, Kalen and his group found their first true weapon. Not a tool, not a stone, but a cache of forgotten explosives sealed decades ago when the tunnels were first dug. The Aurelians had left them behind, careless, thinking their slaves too broken to discover them. When Kalen's rough fingers brushed the crates, he felt it, not just the weight of powder and metal, but the weight of possibility. The spark had found its tinder. That night, by the dim glow of shattered lanterns, the first plan was born. They would not strike at the overseers directly. Not yet. Instead, they would destroy the statues above, the towering emblems of the crown that loomed over every street. Symbols of domination, symbols of eternity, symbols that could bleed. The Aurelians believed their power was unshakable. But power is often only as strong as its image. Break the image and you begin to break the belief. And so the miners began their work. In secret, in silence, preparing the night when stone kings would fall. The rebellion had not yet begun. Not fully. Not in fire, not in blood, but the sparks had been lit. And soon the darkness of Halora would burn with a new light, a light the Aurelians could never extinguish. The day humanity declared, "No more kings." Part 4, the night of falling statues, Halora's capital city, Vera, was built to face the sea. Its streets wound down from the cliffs in narrow terraces, each level framed by alien banners that rippled black against the salt wind. At its heart stood the statue of the Aurelian king, 3 stories high, carved from obsidian hauled across the stars. His crown stretched like talons into the sky, his shadow falling across every market, every home, every whisper of life. The Aurelians had demanded that the people kneel before the statue at dawn and dusk, bowing to the figure that claimed dominion over their breath, their blood, their very thoughts. Children grew up beneath its gaze. Lovers met in its shadow. The people lived and died with the black eyes of their conqueror upon them. But on this night, the statue did not stand alone, hidden in shadows. Beneath the cloak of silence, Kalen Vey and his miners crept into the city. Their clothes reeked of ore dust, their hands raw from labor, but their eyes burned with something unmined, something fierce. Each carried a piece of the forgotten explosive salvaged from the tunnels, crude charges wrapped in cloth, their fuses short and fragile. The city was restless. Word of defiance had begun to spread, carried in whispers through the taverns, scratched into walls with broken nails, murmured in songs hummed by children. The Aurelians had sensed it. Overseers patrolled more heavily, their armor glowing faintly in the night, their minds probing for rebellion like knives searching for soft flesh. But the Aurelians did not know where to look. They had never thought to fear the miners. The plan was simple: topple the statue, shatter the king's image, prove to every human in Vera that the crown was not eternal. Kalen stood at the base of the monument, staring up at the towering figure. The crown caught the moonlight, its spires glimmering as though alive, his stomach twisted with fear. If they were caught, death would not be quick. The Aurelians made examples of rebels, dragging them through streets until nothing remained but silence. But fear is brittle when hope hardens around it. And Kalen was no longer afraid of death. He was afraid only of silence returning. "Here," he whispered, pressing one of the charges into the cracks of the statue's base. His companions followed, sliding explosives into seams, wrapping cords tight, hiding sparks where no overseer's eyes would wander. Each heartbeat felt like thunder in the stillness. Above them, the black crown loomed, a symbol carved not just from stone, but from centuries of domination. Tonight, it would fall. The overseers came sooner than expected. A pair of them stalked the square, their forms tall and insect-like, armor etched with the king's sigil. Their thoughts hissed into the minds of those nearby, scraping like blades. Who dares gather? Who dares defy? Kalen froze. The miners scattered into the shadows. The overseers paused at the statue's base, their alien eyes narrowing. One bent low, its talons brushing the seams in the stone where the charges were hidden. Kalen's breath caught. If they found the explosives, if they saw... The overseer straightened. Its mind flared with suspicion, and then from the edge of the square a child's voice rang out. "No more kings." The words cut the night like lightning. The overseers spun, their crowns flaring with psychic light. The boy stood trembling, no older than 12, his fists clenched, his body shaking with terror. But he did not kneel. He repeated the words louder, stronger, his voice carrying through the streets. "No more kings." From the windows above, faces appeared. From the alleys, whispers rose. The words spread, picked up by trembling voices, then steadier ones, until the square itself trembled with the chant. No more kings. No more kings. No more kings. The overseers hissed, their power lashing out to silence the crowd. But the moment had already broken. Kalen struck the fuse. The explosion tore through the night, stone split. Obsidian cracked. The statue of the Aurelian king shuddered, groaning like a mountain in its death throes. Then with a scream of rending rock, it collapsed. The crown shattered into 1,000 shards, scattering across the square like broken teeth. The people gasped, then roared. For the first time since the Aurelians' arrival, joy swept through Vera like fire. Chains rattled as fists pounded walls. The chant rose louder, stronger, unstoppable. No more kings. No more kings. No more kings! The overseers staggered back, their psychic grip faltering. For all their power, they could not command the hearts of a people who had seen their oppressor fall. In the glow of the burning ruins, Kalen stood tall, his face lit by the fire. For the first time, he felt not like a miner, not like a slave. He felt human, and the city watching felt the same. The Aurelians' response was swift. At dawn, their warships descended, black wings blotting the sky. Soldiers marched through the streets, their whips and blades dripping fear. The ruins of the statue smoldered at their feet. The king's herald spoke with voices that cracked like thunder. This rebellion will be crushed. This colony belongs to the crown. But the words did not silence the people. The people no longer whispered. They no longer bowed. They met the herald's voices with their own. No more kings. The Aurelians struck, lashing out with fury. But even as the streets ran red, the rebellion had already grown beyond their reach. The statue had fallen. The image was broken. And once a people see their king can bleed, they will never kneel again. The day humanity declared, "No more kings," Part 5. The first blood dawn came to Halora in flames. The sea mist rolled in from the cliffs, veiling the shattered ruins of the statue, but the smoke of burning homes stained the horizon darker than storm clouds. The night of falling stone had ignited something the Aurelians could not contain, and now the monarchy's retribution fell swift and merciless. Black-winged ships hung over Vera like carrion birds. Their shadows swallowed the streets, and their cannons hissed beams of searing light into buildings where chants had echoed only hours before. The Aurelians marched through the avenues in perfect formations. Tall figures clad in obsidian armor, their crowns of black fire flaring with psychic force. Each step was a declaration. The crown is eternal. Defy it and you will be erased, and yet the people did not kneel. They met the soldiers not with silence but with stones. With iron bars ripped from fences, with torches lit from the burning ruins. Farmers who had never held weapons stood shoulder to shoulder with miners, with merchants, with mothers clutching children at their side. The city's heartbeat was no longer fear. It was fury. Kalen Vey was in the thick of it. His arms ached from swinging a stolen Aurelian blade, heavy, jagged, alive with alien energy. But he did not falter. Around him, men and women fought with desperate strength, striking down soldiers with tools still stained from the mines. Each death they dealt was not just a blow against their oppressors, but a proof. The Aurelians were not gods. They bled. The first time Kalen cut one down, he had expected triumph. Instead, he felt only gravity, a sorrow heavier than the blade itself. The soldier fell with a cry that was not alien but startlingly human-like, and Kalen realized in horror that this war would not be clean. They were not fighting statues nor shadows. They were fighting flesh. Flesh that could die. Flesh that would die. Still he fought. For what else was there if not this? The Aurelians answered the defiance with fire. They unleashed their heralds, robed figures who carried the king's voice into battle. Their mouths did not move, but their thoughts cut through the air like spears, forcing men to their knees, driving women to scream, splitting skulls with invisible pressure. Entire blocks crumpled beneath the weight of the king's will. But even this, the Halorans resisted. The people had heard another voice, Earth's voice, calm and steady, declaring, "Humanity does not serve kings." That truth became their shield. When the heralds pressed their minds, the Halorans shouted the words back. At first, the defiance was ragged, desperate, but then it swelled into a roar that drowned out the psychic assault. No more kings. No more kings. No more kings. And suddenly the heralds faltered. Their power, built on submission, could not root itself in defiance. The unthinkable happened. Humans pushed back. The price was high. Bodies lay in the streets, men and women cut down, children trampled in the chaos, blood mixing with the dust of fallen stone. The Aurelians made examples, dragging prisoners to the ruined square, breaking them beneath the shattered crown. Kalen saw friends die in moments that blurred together, faces he had known in the mines now cold and lifeless. But even as grief threatened to crush him, he saw something stronger rising. For every human who fell, 2 more picked up their weapons. For every cry of pain, 10 voices shouted defiance. The rebellion had crossed a line of no return. Fear was dead. In its place stood resolve. By nightfall, Vera was unrecognizable. Streets once lined with alien banners were barricaded with overturned carts and burning timber. Entire neighborhoods became fortresses, each family guarding their corner with sharpened tools and stolen rifles. The Aurelians held the skies, but the ground was contested. Kalen stood atop the ruins of the central square, the place where the statue had once loomed. The broken crown lay scattered around him, its obsidian shards gleaming like black ice. Around him, survivors gathered, miners, farmers, children with soot on their faces, mothers with blood on their hands. He raised his blade high, his voice raw but unyielding. "This is not the end," he shouted, his words carried by the sea wind. "This is the beginning. They will come with fire. They will come with death. But hear me, hear me. We are free already. For the first time, we are free." A roar answered him, a roar that shook the cliffs, that carried to the ships above, that spread through the tunnels and farmlands beyond the city. The rebellion was no longer a whisper, no longer a spark. It was a firestorm. Far above Halora, in the cold reaches of space, Earth listened, the broadcast of the fallen statue, the chant of the people, the defiance echoing even beneath fire. All of it reached Earth through hidden channels. And on Earth, leaders stood in silence, watching, knowing the choice before them. They could let Halora burn, a lone colony crushed beneath the weight of an ancient crown. Or they could honor their own words. The decision was not simple. War with the Aurelians would be no small struggle. It would be the greatest conflict humanity had ever faced. Yet the leaders knew. The moment they had spoken those words, war had already begun, and so preparation stirred. Fleets gathered. Messages spread. Across Earth and its colonies, men and women whispered the phrase that was now a battle cry. No more kings. The fire of Halora had become the fire of humanity. On Halora, Kalen looked at the faces around him, weary but unbroken. He saw in their eyes not despair, but the glimmer of a future worth fighting for. For the first time, the colony did not feel enslaved. It felt alive. The Aurelians had drawn blood, but so had the humans, and the stars themselves seemed to lean closer, listening to the war that had only just begun. The day humanity declared no more kings, Part 6, the crown's wrath, the Aurelians had underestimated Halora. That mistake would not be made twice. The fall of the statue, the chants in the streets, the defiance of the miners, these were not seen by the monarchy as rebellion alone. They were seen as insult, and insult was unforgivable. The king's decrees were carried across the empire on black-winged ships, echoing from 1,000 heralds in voices cold as iron. Let Halora burn. Let its people suffer. Let them know the cost of defiance. The crown does not break. And so the crown's wrath fell. It began with the skies. The warships that had once lingered above the city like shadows now opened their throats, unleashing storms of fire. White-hot beams rained down, tearing through districts, splitting stone and wood alike. Streets that had become barricades dissolved into ash. Families that had stood together were erased in the span of a heartbeat. The sea itself boiled beneath the bombardment, waves curling into steam as if the oceans were retreating from the slaughter. Kalen Vey watched it unfold from the ruins of Vera's square. His ears deafened by the screams, his heart clenched in horror. He had known retaliation would come, but nothing like this. This was not a battle. It was annihilation. Still, he did not falter. "Into the tunnels," he shouted, his voice carrying through the chaos. "The mines. They won't burn what they cannot see." And so the people fled underground, vanishing into the labyrinth where the rebellion had first begun. The Aurelians scoured the city, but every family, every fighter melted into the earth, into the veins of stone that had enslaved them for so long. Now those same veins would keep them alive, but the Aurelians did not relent. They descended with their soldiers, hordes clad in black armor, their psychic crowns blazing. They did not simply kill, they broke. Their minds lanced through the tunnels, driving men to madness, filling women with despair, tearing memories from children until they screamed. The Aurelians fed on fear, and in the darkness of the mines, they sowed it like seeds, yet for all their cruelty, they could not extinguish what Halora had already lit. The miners knew these tunnels better than any invader. They turned shafts into traps, collapsing walls onto armored patrols. They lit fires in chambers, suffocating enemies with smoke. They used the very ore they had been forced to harvest as weapons, hurling shards sharp enough to pierce alien flesh. The rebellion adapted, and every act of survival was an act of defiance. The worst came when the Aurelians unleashed their crown forges, machines shaped like colossal spires, planted into the ground to warp the very air. The forges pulsed with black light, a psychic field that gnawed at human will, pressing into minds with whispers, kneel, submit, obey. Entire blocks of fighters staggered, their chants faltering, their courage stripped away. Some fell to their knees, some dropped their weapons, some clawed at their own faces trying to rip the voices out. Kalen himself nearly broke beneath the weight. The whispers clawed through his skull, dragging him back to the years of chains, to the days when he had believed he was nothing more than a miner. His knees buckled. His vision swam, and then, through the haze, he remembered the broadcast. Humanity does not serve kings. He forced the words through his lips, each syllable a battle. His voice rose into a ragged shout cutting through the darkness. "No more kings!" The others heard. Their voices followed. The chant spread, ragged at first, then stronger, swelling into a roar that filled the tunnels. The crown forges pulsed harder, the whispers screaming, but they could not drown the fire. Humanity's words stood like a wall against the psychic tide. The Aurelians had unleashed their greatest weapon, and still, the Halorans defied them. Above the battlefield, the monarchy's heralds reported back to their throne. Their words carried not fear but confusion. "These humans do not kneel," one whispered. "They chant against the crown. They resist the forges." In the crystal halls of the Aurelian king, silence fell. For the first time in centuries, the monarch faced a truth too dangerous to name. His throne was not inevitable. His reign was not eternal. Defiance was contagious. If Halora resisted, other worlds might follow. If one crown shattered, others could fall. And so the king's wrath deepened into obsession. Halora would not simply be crushed. It would be erased. Kalen did not know of the king's decree. He only knew the cost of survival. His people were starving, their supplies dwindling, their children coughing in the smoke-filled tunnels. The rebellion had bled and bled deeply. Friends gone, families torn, streets reduced to rubble. And yet, when he looked into the eyes of those who remained, he saw not despair. He saw fire. The Aurelians had burned their city. They had slaughtered their people. And still the chant endured. No more kings. The Aurelians had turned Halora into a graveyard. But the Halorans were not the dead, they were the living, and they would rise again. The day humanity declared no more kings, Part 7. The message spreads. The Aurelians thought Halora's screams would be contained in ash. They believed no sound could escape the fire. They were wrong. Even as the monarchy's warships burned the city to its bones, a handful of rebels broke through the blockade. Their vessel was nothing more than a patched freighter, its engines coughing smoke, its hull riddled with holes. But it carried something far heavier than ore. It carried a recording. The message was simple, raw, unpolished. It showed the miners in their tunnels, their fists raised, their throats hoarse from defiance. It showed women lifting children above the smoke, soldiers dragging wounded comrades to safety, flames painting the walls of the city behind them. And above all, it carried the chant, "No more kings." That sound, raw, desperate, unbreakable, pierced through the void like a blade. The freighter's signal rode stolen frequencies, bouncing from relay to relay, threading through every crack in the Empire's network until it reached places the Aurelians could not silence. And then it spread. On a mining moon 3 systems away, workers paused at their drills as the chant roared from a smuggled console. They had broken their backs in the dark for generations, their sweat feeding a crown they had never seen. As the words washed over them, something shifted in their chests. Their hammers struck the rock one last time, then turned against their overseers. On a farming world where the Aurelians claimed the first share of every harvest, peasants gathered in the fields, their hands blistered, their children thin. They listened to the cries of Halora and wept, not with sorrow but with recognition. They took up their plows as weapons and painted banners with soil-stained hands. No more kings. Even among the Aurelians' alien vassals, the cracks began to spread. Species bound by conquest, their wills bent beneath the psychic crown, now felt the weight of something new. Possibility. For centuries they had told themselves resistance was futile, that the crown was eternal. And yet in Halora, a world of frail humans had shouted into the void and lived. The impossible was no longer impossible. The Aurelians scrambled to silence it. Broadcasts were intercepted. Signal towers were demolished. Entire villages were razed for whispering the forbidden words, but the message had already taken root. It was no longer just a sound, it was a story. A story repeated in hushed taverns, in darkened barracks, in the whispers of mothers to their children. The humans do not serve kings. They stood, and so can we. Earth watched it all unfold with grave silence. Their leaders had expected a response, but not this, a firestorm of defiance leaping from world to world. What began as a single broadcast had become something larger than strategy, larger than war. It had become belief, and belief was more dangerous than any fleet. Still, Earth could not let Halora stand alone. They sent couriers into the dark, weaving through blockades, carrying crates of weapons, medical supplies, food compressed into bars that could keep children alive for weeks. They sent technicians to teach rebels how to hijack Aurelian signals, how to twist the Empire's own channels into weapons. They sent soldiers too, though not in armies, just a handful here, a handful there, seeds scattered into soil already fertile with defiance. Earth understood. This was not their war alone. It was the galaxy's. Meanwhile, on Halora, the rebellion endured in the dark. Kalen Vey and his fighters clung to the tunnels, their city above reduced to rubble. But they were not defeated. When the first supply crate smuggled through Earth's network arrived in their hands, wrapped in the seal of humanity, they wept. Not because of the weapons it carried, but because it proved what they had almost stopped believing. They were not alone. Kalen stood before his people, a torch flickering in the dust-filled cavern. The Earth-made crate at his feet. His voice cracked as he spoke. We thought we were shouting into darkness. But the darkness answered. Not with chains, not with silence, but with fire. He lifted a rifle from the crate, its steel gleaming faintly in the torchlight. Halora is no longer a colony. It is a spark. And sparks. His voice broke, then rose, trembling but fierce. Sparks become flames. The cavern roared with voices. No more kings. The Aurelians raged at this defiance, but rage was a brittle shield. The more they tightened their grip, the more the chant spread. They sent fleets to crush uprisings, but for every one extinguished, 3 more rose. They executed rebels on broadcast, but their dying words became rallying cries. And in the crystal halls of the monarch, the king himself felt something he had not known in 1,000 years. Fear. Because he knew now what the humans had unleashed was not just rebellion, it was contagion. And contagion could topple empires. Far from Halora, in the shadow of a red star, a slave world rose in open revolt. Its leaders carved the words into their banners. No more kings. On the outer rim, a fleet of smugglers turned pirate, striking at Aurelian supply lines, their captains swearing loyalty not to any throne but to freedom. Even whispers reached the throne world itself, where some of the Aurelians' own subjects began to murmur dangerous things in the shadows. Kalen Vey could not know it from his tunnels, but Halora had become more than a city. It had become a beacon, and across the stars the universe was listening. The day humanity declared no more kings Part 8. The crown fractures. For 1,000 years the Aurelians had ruled without question. Their empire was built not just on steel and fire, but on certainty, the certainty that their crown was eternal, that their subjects were incapable of true resistance, that rebellion was a spark easily stamped out. But now the certainty wavered. The cracks began within the throne itself. The Aurelian king sat upon his dais of living crystal, its spires curling upward like frozen fire. His crown was not a mere ornament, but an organism, woven into his skull, its veins pulsing with psychic light. Through it he had felt the wills of billions bend, their obedience a tide flowing into his veins. Yet lately, the tide had changed. Whispers carried through the crown, not of loyalty, but of doubt. When he closed his eyes, he no longer felt endless submission. He felt fractures, small pockets of resistance flickering like embers across the galaxy. At first he thought them insignificant, but they grew. And the more he reached to snuff them out, the more they spread, slippery as smoke. The humans had given the galaxy a word the crown could not erase. Freedom. In the High Council chambers, voices rose in discord. The old generals snarled for vengeance. Crush them utterly, they spat, their talons clattering on the obsidian floor. Burn their earth, salt their colonies, and let no trace remain. But others, nobles fattened on tribute from dozens of worlds, shifted uneasily. We have already burned Halora, one hissed, his jeweled skin gleaming under the hall's light. And yet the flames spread. Every punishment breeds new rebellion. Every execution makes martyrs. A third voice trembled, almost whispering, what if the humans are right? What if kings are not eternal? Gasps filled the chamber. The king's crown flared with psychic rage, and the whisperer crumpled to the floor, his mind snuffed out like a candle. But the damage was done. The words had been spoken. The doubt had been named. Beyond the throne world, the Empire's fleets faltered. Admirals who once crushed uprisings with iron precision now hesitated, knowing every strike could ignite 10 more. Soldiers who had believed themselves invincible began to hear the chant of the humans in their dreams. No more kings. Some broke under it, deserting their posts. Others stayed, but fought with the unease of men and women who no longer knew if their cause was just. Even the crown forges, the Empire's great psychic engines, wavered. Their fields pressed into minds with whispers of obedience, but resistance grew like weeds through stone. On one subject world, the forge simply failed. Its operators fled, abandoning the structure to rebels who turned it into a monument. They painted its black spire with the forbidden words in 100 tongues. The image spread faster than the Aurelians could contain. On Halora, Kalen Vey did not yet know of the fractures above. But he felt them faintly, like pressure lifting from his chest. Patrols were fewer. Supply lines cracked. The enemy no longer pressed with the same precision. He sat in the tunnels, his hands raw from work, his beard streaked with dust. Around him, the survivors tended to the wounded, shared what little food arrived, and whispered of news from beyond. Uprisings on other worlds, signals intercepted that carried their chant into alien skies. Kalen listened in silence, his heart heavy, for though the fire spread, Halora still bled. Children starved. Families grieved, and the city above remained a ruin. Yet when he closed his eyes, he could hear it, the echo of their words carried across the stars. His people were not just victims. They were the spark that had set the galaxy aflame, and that gave him strength. Back on the throne world, the king brooded in silence. For the first time in his reign, his crown whispered not victory but warning. He summoned his seers, those blind creatures who dwelt in pools of molten glass, reading futures from ripples of light. Their bodies writhed in the heat, their voices rising as one. The crown fractures. The tide shifts. The song of the humans spreads. It cannot be unmade, the king's voice thundered, shaking the chamber. Then remake it. Drown them. Silence them. Tell me what must be done. The seers wailed, their flesh bubbling in the molten pools. No more kings. No more kings. The words are chains upon your throne. You cannot rule what no longer believes. The king's roar shook the crystal walls, but their prophecy lingered, staining the air like smoke. In the weeks that followed, fissures deepened. Some Aurelians began secret pacts with rebels, trading information for protection should the crown fall. Others fled to the outer rim, abandoning their posts entirely. Even within the royal guard there were whispers, mutters that the king had grown weak, that his grip slipped, that perhaps a new monarch should rise. The Aurelians had always feared rebellion from without. They had never imagined betrayal from within. Now they faced both, and so the king made his choice. If rebellion was contagion, then contagion must be burned at its source. Not just Halora, not just the scattered colonies, but Earth itself, the birthplace of Defiance, the root of the poison. He would bring his fleets against the blue planet. He would turn its oceans to steam, its cities to glass, its skies to fire. He would erase the world from which the words had come. Only then, he believed, could the crown be whole again. But in his heart, a sliver of doubt remained. For though the king could command fire and fleet, he could not command belief. And belief was already slipping through his fingers. The day humanity declared, "No more Kings Part 9, the siege of Earth," the Aurelians had burned cities before. They had boiled oceans, cracked moons, erased civilizations until only dust and memory remained. To them, Earth was no different, a stone among many, a world that dared speak too loudly. But they did not understand. Earth was not a stone. Earth was the root. The fleets arrived without warning. The skies of Earth darkened, filled with the silhouettes of warships vast as mountains, their hulls aglow with the sickly light of the crown. They came in waves, blotting out the stars, their engines a rumble that shook the oceans and rattled the bones of cities below. From orbit, they unleashed fire. Beams carved through the atmosphere, scorching forests, splitting highways, crumbling towers like paper. Entire districts vanished in storms of light. Billions looked upward and saw not the heavens but their conquerors, and yet Earth did not cower. The first strike had barely landed before the broadcast went out. Every screen, every radio, every device thrummed with the same message. "No more kings, stand." It was not a command. It was not even strategy. It was a call simple and raw. And from the streets of New Delhi to the hills of Peru, from the frozen north to the deserts of Africa, humanity answered. Earth's armies had prepared for this. They had studied Halora's uprising, smuggled reports of Aurelian tactics, dissected their weapons. While the king had believed humanity weak, Earth had sharpened itself in silence. Satellites that had once mapped weather now became weapons, hurling tungsten rods from orbit with the force of meteors. Cities turned their power grids into electromagnetic nets, frying the circuitry of landing craft. In the skies, swarms of drones danced like hornets, tearing into Aurelian armor with precision strikes, and below, humanity fought not as scattered rebels, but as one. Soldiers and civilians alike stood shoulder to shoulder, wielding rifles, Molotovs, stolen Aurelian blades. Farmers rose from their fields. Fishermen took to the seas with explosives strapped to their boats. Children carried messages through bombed-out streets, their voices steady as they whispered the chant into every ear. No more kings. But the Aurelians were not unprepared. Their warships were older than human civilization, their weapons forged in the furnaces of 1,000 conquered worlds. They brought their crown forges, planting them like black spires into Earth's soil. The air thickened with whispers. Men dropped their weapons, clutching their skulls. Women fell to their knees, their minds buckling beneath the weight of alien will. In some cities, entire battalions surrendered without a shot, their thoughts drowned in the tide of the crown. For a moment, it seemed Earth would crack. Then came the voices. At first, they were faint. A transmission from Halora, carried on stolen frequencies, reaching Earth in broken fragments. The chant, ragged and raw, echoing through static. No more kings. And then more signals followed. From the mining moon, from the farming world, from rebel cells hidden in the dark. Voices from across the galaxy threading together, refusing silence. Earth heard them all. The crown's whispers pressed down, but the chants rose higher. No more kings. No more kings. It was not just defiance. It was shield. The Aurelians had built their empire on obedience, on the belief that no mind could resist their psychic tide. But here was proof, millions of voices defying them, not in silence but in unison. And for the first time the crown faltered. In orbit, the Aurelian king watched. From his throne aboard a flagship vast as a continent, he felt the tide shift through his crown. The wills of humans should have bent to him. Instead, they pushed back, sharp and burning, cutting into his mind. He roared, unleashing his power in waves of psychic fire. Cities buckled under the force. Skies cracked. The oceans themselves recoiled. But humanity did not kneel. In New York, amidst the rubble of skyscrapers, a woman raised a torn banner painted with the words. In Cairo, a soldier deafened by bombardment screamed the chant until his throat tore. In Beijing, children huddled in shelters pounded their fists against the walls, their voices tiny but unbroken. The king's crown pulsed with fury. Yet the more he struck, the louder they became. And then came Earth's strike. From deep beneath the ice of Antarctica, a weapon long hidden rose, a planetary rail, a cannon that stretched for miles. Built in secret during the years humanity had pretended to be weak, powered by the fury of the planet itself, it fired a single spear of light, pure and blinding. The beam tore through the flagship's shields, carving across its hull, splitting crystal and metal as if it were bone. The ship staggered, its psychic field lashing in pain. For the first time in his reign, the Aurelian king felt not invincibility, but vulnerability. The battle raged on. Earth burned, yes, but it did not fall. Every street became a fortress, every ruin a weapon. Humanity did not fight for conquest. They fought for breath, for family, for the right to stand without chains. The king had wanted to erase a world. Instead, he had awakened one. Far from Earth, across colonies and subject worlds, the sight of resistance shook the galaxy. If Earth could endure the crown, if Earth could wound the king himself, then no world was beyond hope. And as the fires of Earth lit the void, the galaxy began to whisper the words that had become impossible to silence. No more kings. The king still lived. His fleet still burned, but the fractures deepened, and though Earth bled, it had not broken. The siege was not the end. It was the beginning. The day humanity declared no more Kings Part X, the War of Crowns, the siege of Earth was supposed to be the end. Instead, it became the beginning. The Aurelian king had come to erase a world, but he had failed. Earth still burned, scarred and smoking, yet unbroken, and from its ashes humanity did not retreat into silence. They rose, voices louder than before, echoing into the void. No more kings. The word spread faster than fleets. From Halora's tunnels to the moons of the outer rim, rebellion became war. Entire planets tore down their Aurelian overseers. Slave worlds rose in open defiance, smashing the crown forges that had bent their minds for centuries. What began as whispers had become an inferno, every act of rebellion feeding another. And for the first time in a millennium, the empire bled. Earth became the heart of the storm. Its cities, once ordinary, now thrummed with command centers, weapons factories, and signal towers blasting the chant into every corner of the galaxy. Out of its ruined streets marched armies not of conquest, but of liberation, soldiers carrying banners painted with ash, bearing the scars of siege as proof that kings could be resisted. Kylan Vey, scarred and weary, arrived on Earth aboard a smuggled freighter. When he stepped onto the soil of the blue planet, he felt as though he were stepping into legend. He was no general, no politician, just a miner who had shouted when no one else would. Yet when he stood before Earth's leaders, their soldiers saluted him, not as a commander but as a symbol. The spark endures, one of them whispered. Kylan shook his head, his voice hoarse. The spark is not enough. Now we make fire. The fire spread in fleets. Human engineers working with defectors from the Aurelian Empire forged weapons that blended stolen alien technology with human ingenuity. Starships once used for trade were armored and armed, their hulls bristling with cannons. Drones swarmed like living clouds, guided by human will rather than psychic chains. And on the fronts, soldiers from dozens of species fought side by side, their chants in 100 languages but carrying the same meaning. No more kings. The Aurelians answered with fury. Their fleet still numbered in the thousands, their forges still pressed upon the minds of rebels, their armies still vast and disciplined. They unleashed horrors long hidden, beasts bred for war, weapons that unraveled matter, storms of psychic fire that could blind entire continents. But where once such terror had broken worlds, now it only hardened them. For every city reduced to rubble, 5 more worlds rose in revolt. For every martyr executed, 1,000 voices cried their name. The king had thought fear eternal. Instead, he had made courage contagious. The war was named in whispers the War of Crowns. Not because humanity sought to wear one, but because they sought to break them all. The Aurelians fought for their monarchy. Humanity fought for something far older, far fiercer, the right to stand without a master. Kylan found himself swept into its current. He had never wanted command, but he became the face of the rebellion. In the tunnels of Halora, his voice had lit a spark. Now across the galaxy, that spark was flame. When he spoke, soldiers listened. When he fought, they followed. He was not a king, not a ruler, but a man who refused chains. And in a galaxy weary of crowns, that was enough. The war raged from system to system. Worlds that had bowed for centuries now stood as fortresses. On the red sands of Valor, rebels turned canyons into traps, annihilating an Aurelian fleet in a storm of fire. In the frozen wastes of Thrine, slaves shattered their forges, their first breath of free thought turning into a scream of defiance. And above them all, in the endless void, great battles unfolded, armadas clashing in firestorms that lit the stars. Human captains fought beside alien allies, their fleets a patchwork of stolen ships and hastily forged weapons. Against them loomed the black-armored might of the Crown, each vessel pulsing with psychic command. But the Crown was faltering. Every victory the Aurelians claimed was hollow. Every defeat the rebels suffered only feeding the fire. The war was no longer a question of strength. It was a question of belief. In his crystal throne the king raged. Through his crown he felt the empire crumble. Worlds slipping away, generals faltering, whispers spreading like plague. His army still fought, his fleet still burned, but the certainty was gone. For centuries he had ruled unchallenged. Now the chant gnawed at his mind, echoing in every thought, no more kings. No more kings, he would not allow it. He could not. The king summoned the full weight of his empire, calling fleets from every corner, pulling his armies back to the throne world. There he would gather his strength. There he would make his stand. If the galaxy wished to defy him, they would break themselves upon his crown. Humanity and its allies knew what this meant. The war was reaching its end. Not in scattered uprisings, not in distant sieges, but in a final confrontation at the empire's heart. If the crown fell there, it would fall everywhere. If it endured, rebellion would wither into ash. Kalen stood aboard a starship overlooking the mustering fleets. Ships from Earth, from Halora, from freed colonies, from species that had never known the taste of rebellion until now, all gathered under a banner not of conquest, but of freedom. He looked at them and felt the weight of it all. The faces of the dead, the voices of the living, the fire that had spread from a single chant. This is not a war for thrones, he said softly, though the words carried. This is a war to end them. The fleet stirred, engines burning like a million torches. The galaxy moved toward its reckoning. And in the distance, on his throne of living crystal, the king whispered to himself, though no one heard, if they want no kings, then they shall have no crown at all. His eyes burned with something darker than rage, something desperate, for even kings knew when the crown was slipping. The day humanity declared, no more kings part Anting, the last crown. The galaxy held its breath. The fleets gathered at the edge of the throne world, a planet vast and radiant, its surface covered in spires of living crystal that pulsed like veins of fire. Above it, the Aurelian armada blotted the stars, ships in countless thousands, their hulls black and gold, their weapons humming with centuries of conquest. It was the empire's heart, its forge, its crown. To reach it meant to defy history itself. And into that abyss, humanity and its allies sailed. Kalen Vey stood on the bridge of a battered warship that had once been a freighter. Around him, captains from a dozen species awaited his word. He was no general, yet all eyes turned to him. They had leaders of strategy, masters of fleet command, but what they needed in that moment was not tactics. They needed belief. Kalen's voice was rough, heavy with the weight of years and war. Look at them. Their crowns, their armies, their throne. He gestured at the looming planet, its spires glowing like a wound in the void. For centuries they told us no world could resist. For centuries they told us we were too weak, too scattered, too small. But here we are. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of engines. Kalen clenched his fist. Today we tell them no more kings. And when this day ends, there will be no crown left to bind another soul. The fleets roared in answer. The war began in fire. Armadas collided, the void shattering with storms of energy and debris. Human ships surged alongside alien allies, weaving through the cracks of the Aurelian phalanx, striking with a ferocity born not of conquest, but of survival. The king's forces fought with the discipline of centuries, every ship moving as though guided by a single will. Their crowns bound them in perfect unity, their weapons precise and merciless. Against such might the rebellion should have broken, but it did not. Every fallen ship became a beacon, every dying crew a cry that echoed across the comms. No more kings. The chant became a weapon, carried in every language, amplified through signal towers, pulsing into the minds of Aurelians themselves. Soldiers faltered, Pilots hesitated. For the first time in generations, doubt pierced the crown's command. Kalen's ship broke through the defensive lines, plunging into the atmosphere of the throne world. Crystal towers rose around them, cities carved into living light. The sky boiled with Aurelian war beasts, winged creatures of fire and steel, but human squadrons cut them down, their trails burning across the heavens. On the ground, armies clashed. Human soldiers and freed slaves stormed the crystal streets, tearing down statues of kings, shattering the forges where crowns were made. The Aurelians fought like demons, their psychic bonds screaming in unison. But for every rebel that fell, 10 more surged forward, and at the center of it all lay the palace, the throne of living crystal, pulsing like a heart. Kalen entered its halls with a small band of fighters, each step echoing like thunder. The walls shimmered with ancient power, reflecting faces of kings long dead. At the far end, upon a throne grown from the world itself, sat the king. He was vast, draped in armor woven from crystal veins, his crown blazing like a star. His eyes burned with fury and fear alike, the weight of an empire pressing down upon him. "So," the king said, his voice filling the chamber, trembling the very stone. "The miner comes to claim a crown." Kalen shook his head. His armor was dented, his face scarred, his hands trembling, but his voice was steady. "I came to break it." The king rose. The crown flared and the chamber shook. Power surged through him, psychic storms that could tear armies apart, fire that could reduce cities to ash. He was the embodiment of the empire, the weight of every crown bound into one. But Kalen stood firm. Behind him, the chants of billions echoed, carried across the galaxy, pouring into the hall like a tide. No more kings, no more kings. The king unleashed his fury. Blades of crystal rose from the floor. Storms of light seared the air. But Kalen advanced, each step carried not by strength but by the will of those who had risen. Every blow he endured was met with another voice shouting, another world standing, another crown shattering across the stars. At last, Kalen reached the throne. The crown blazed, desperate, burning brighter than suns. But Kalen's hand, calloused and scarred from years in the mines, closed around it. "It ends," he whispered, and he crushed it. The crystal throne screamed. The crown shattered into dust, its shards dissolving like smoke. Across the galaxy, every crown forged in its image cracked and fell, their psychic chains breaking. A billion voices gasped as freedom poured into them, a flood that could not be contained. The king staggered, his eyes wide, his power unraveling. For the first time in his reign, he was simply a man. He sank to his knees, his throne collapsing around him, and with a final breath he whispered, "Then rule," without crowns. But Kalen did not rule. He turned his back, leaving the hall as it crumbled, the king's words drowned by the roar of freedom outside. The war of crowns was over. The Aurelians fell, not to conquerors, but to the will of the free. Worlds once bound in silence now sang with voices unchained. Statues toppled, forges burned, armies laid down their weapons. Humanity had not claimed a throne. They had erased it. And in the years that followed, when histories were written, they did not speak of kings or emperors. They spoke of a miner who had once shouted in the dark, and of a chant that had swept the stars. No more kings. The day the galaxy remembered forever. The day the crowns broke.